A quick recap of working with color. There are a couple different ways to add color to the file. Best practice is to work with the swatch palette. So I'm going to work with the swatch palette. We go to color and we go to swatches. Now the swatch palette, just like in Adobe Illustrator, is simply a place where you can keep all of your colors. And it's great to work with the swatch palette for a number of reasons. So let's begin by, we can take some of these pre-made colors. First of all, I can duplicate them by coming down here and dragging this to the new swatch. So I can duplicate a color. I can delete a color. I can organize colors into color groups, and I can change the way I look at the swatches. And we can put lots of different swatches in here. I'm going to talk about gradients at the end of the video. You can also put your gradient swatches in here. But if, for example, I wanted to say these are poster colors, and then I wanted another one, and these are brochure colors. So if you were working in an agency and you had a bunch of different projects, you could organize them this way. You could stay super, super organized. But the other nice thing about having colors in the swatch palette, watch, I'm going to go in. This color represents the fill, and this back here, this represents the stroke. Again, very similar to Illustrator, but watch. Let me make creativity. I'm going to do the color picker. So I'm going to double click, and I go into the color picker, CMYK colors, RGB colors, different color systems here. This is hue, saturation, and balance. These are your lab colors. We won't talk about these right now. We're going to concentrate on CMYK, which is for print, RGB, which is for digital. And down here is the hex, which relates to the RGB. Again, it's a digital way of expressing a color. So let me do this. Now my colors right now are being expressed in CMYK. So if I choose this color and I say add CMYK swatch, watch what happens over here. See that? I've added the swatch now to the swatch menu. So there it is. And I can now grab it and I can apply it to pretty much anything I want to apply it to. Remember that color is another way to show that things belong together. So probably what I want to do is I want to have Creativity Conference be one color, and I want the date to be a different color. And maybe I'll do Adobe Max in black. The other thing you can do if you're using your colors through the swatch menu is you can tint them. So if I choose a color and I decide I wanted to use various tints of that color throughout the file, I can do that too. And then yet another thing that you can do with the swatch menu is if you decide that this color that you're working with, you say, it's too pale. If I double click on it, I go back to the color picker. Now I'm in a CMYK version of the color picker because this is a CMYK color, but I can go in and do a live edit. And now everywhere in the document that this color is being used, if I hit preview, I can show you, the change that I've made will show up. And that'll happen everywhere the color is in use. So that's adding colors to the swatch menu. Let's talk about colors and paragraph styles. Now, all of the type in this document, all of the session highlights use paragraph styles, just the way we learn them. So I've got my colors that I want to use here in my swatch menu. So if I go to my paragraph styles and I double click on headline and I come down here, character color is down here towards the bottom. And as you can see, it shows me everything in the swatch palette. So I can go ahead and choose a color. Let's say I want to choose the red. It's kind of a bright red, but let's say I wanted to pick it. And if I grab it, and again, I've got my preview button on so I can see what this looks like. All right, now, and I'll just show you something real quick. You notice that session highlights turned red. even though it's not, I'm using the headline style. So what I did was I started with the headline style and I overwrote the headline style. I went in and kind of busked it and made it lighter. And so this also changed color. And so if I then come in here, look, I'm back in the swatch menu. If I edit this color back in the swatch menu, you notice that it changes wherever it's being used in the document. So you can use colors in conjunction with your paragraph styles. All right. Now let's talk about adding color overall. I think you remember in class on Friday I mentioned that Adobe InDesign uses a layer palette, just like Adobe Illustrator and just like Photoshop when we study Photoshop next year. If you are going to add a colored background or even a photographic background, it makes sense to employ your layers. So if I marquee a box, you can see everything is on this layer. I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to rename this layer Type and Logos, because eventually the logos will go in this file. And then I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to call it Background. And I'm going to pull it down so it's down below, exactly the way I would do it in Illustrator. There's no difference. And if I click on the toggle, I can turn off the topmost layer. I can also lock it down if I don't want to mess with it. And now I can go in, I can use my rectangle tool, and I can use it in conjunction with my colors. I can draw shapes with my pen tool if I want to. I'm going to show you more about this in the next video when I talk about images. But just to show you, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. All right. And just say, hey, and by the way, we haven't really talked about this, but there is a Pathfinder tool in InDesign. You can use it if you want to, but for now, let's just mush on. So I can create all of these shapes. I have a circle, I have a square. If I put my finger on the Shift key, I can lock that down, and then I can go back in and turn this on. And if I do decide to create a colored background, obviously, I'm going to want to go into, now I'll lock down the background so that I can work on the foreground. Command A makes it so that I select everything. I'm going to change this to white because I want it to pop off the colored background. And then again, Command A to grab everything, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to redefine all of these styles because they're white now, right? So I need to do that. Ugh, it's making me do them one by one. You used to be able to do this at a stroke, but... So if you decide that you want a colored background, don't forget to redefine your paragraph styles. Now, this is fine. It's a little underwhelming. So I'm going to hide this again. I'm going to unlock this. Let me show you two more things that you can do. This tool here, this is the gradient swatch tool. And so if I pull it, as you can see, the gradient swatch is running from white to black. So if I go into color and I double click, here, I'll do it this way. New gradient swatch. So I'll call this gradient swatch background swatch. And it's a linear gradient. You can also do radial gradients. I'm going to start my gradient with magenta. I'm going to end my gradient with white. This is the ramp, so if I want it to be more white than magenta or less white than magenta, hit OK. And there's my background swatch. And as you can see, because I've done it through the swatch menu rather than doing it through the color picker, it's here in the background swatch area. So I can double click on it. I'm going to change it to a linear gradient. And if I have the swatch, the gradient tool highlighted, I can go in and change the direction that the gradient is going in. And if I decide I want to change the kind of gradient, see that? Watch the gradient change because I got the preview button on. Okay? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about here, think back to when we worked in Adobe Illustrator. Remember your blend modes and your transparency. Well, you have those functions here in Adobe InDesign. They're called something different. They're called effects. They're not called transparency. It's the exact same window though. So if I were to create, let's say I created an image. Oh, that's a horrible color. There we go. And I wanted to do something maybe a little more complex. I could come up here and I could do multiply. I could do overlay. I could darken it. I could do the difference. So you can play with these things as much as you like. And you can also play with the opacity. So this you should remember from Adobe Illustrator. It's just called a different thing. Instead of using transparency, they call this the effects menu. All right? So if you wanted to create something with a little bit of visual interest, you could do worse than to come in here and play around with some of these colors. If you're going to create something with a lot of layers, my suggestion to you would be to use the layer tool. I'm going to go up right now. These are all on the same layer. I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back to send that yellow box to the back. And then I'm going to multiply that. So you can have some fun with it. I don't know why it keeps going green on me. I can't seem to get away with that. You can have a little fun with it, but just always remember that, as we've always said from the beginning, there's a tremendous amount of type in this project. Please make sure that the type is readable, depending on what colors you have back here. Pay attention to your values and pay attention to whether or not things are able to be read. The form follows the function. And the function of this is to educate people about what's going on in Adobe Max Conference, the Creativity Conference. So don't get too carried away with brightly colored backgrounds or too busy backgrounds. You still want to be able to read the type. All right, that's kind of a flying intro to adding color to your file. And I'll do another one right now about adding images.